I don't even know where to start with this, but I guess I'll just dive in. My wife, Amanda, and I have been together for a decade, married for 7 of those years. We've got 2 little ones, a boy and a girl, ages 5 and 3. Life's been pretty standard, work, kids, the usual routine. I thought things were fine, normal even, but I've been a fool. A blind, naive fool. It all kicked off about a month ago when Amanda's behavior started to shift. She landed a new job in sales last year, and I was proud of her, especially because she was excelling at it. But lately, she's been getting home later and later, always with some excuse about being out with clients or attending networking events. At first, I didn't give it much thought. I mean, that's just part of the job, right? Then one evening, I got home earlier than usual. My shift at the construction site wrapped up ahead of schedule, and I figured I'd surprise her. But when I stepped inside, the house was eerily quiet. Amanda usually gets home by 6, but it was well past 8. The kids were staying at my mom's that day, so I had the place to myself. I grabbed a beer and settled onto the couch to watch some TV, just waiting for her to walk through the door. An hour or so later, I heard the sound of the door unlocking. I assumed it was Amanda, but when I turned around, it was some guy. A total stranger, standing there with his hand casually resting on Amanda's waist, smiling like he belonged in my house. Amanda froze the moment she saw me, and I just stood up, beer in hand, trying to process what the hell I was looking at. The guy, some slick-looking dude in a suit, looked between us, and for a split second, it felt like he was sizing me up, like I was the one who didn't belong there. Everything seemed to slow down. I remember Amanda stepping forward, saying something along the lines of, "It's not what it looks like." And all I could think was, how many times have you heard that line in movies? And now, here she was saying it to me while that guy's hand was still on her. Then, as if things couldn't get any worse, the guy blurts out, "Maybe now's a good time to tell him, Amanda." Tell me what? I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I was trying to keep my cool. This guy had the nerve to stand there with this smug grin, like he was proud of whatever was going on. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just some random guy. He was someone important to her, someone she'd been hiding from me. I clenched the beer bottle so hard I thought it might shatter. Before I could get a word out, Amanda moved closer, pleading with her eyes. She said, "Let me explain, please." And that's when I lost it. Explain what? That you've been sneaking around behind my back? That this guy thinks it's perfectly normal to waltz into our home like he's a part of our life? But what happened next caught me off guard. I was bracing for a fight, for him to defend himself, for her to start crying or something. But instead, they both sat down on the couch like this was some sort of intervention. The guy introduced himself as Nick, and looking straight at me, he said, "I know this is a shock, but we need to talk to you about something." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "We need to talk to you? Who the hell is we?" "This is my wife we're talking about." Amanda's face was pale, and for the first time, she looked genuinely scared. Not scared of me, but scared of what was about to happen. And then they dropped the bomb. Together, they told me they wanted me to be part of this situation. At first, I didn't understand what that meant, but the more they explained, the more insane it sounded. They'd been seeing each other for months, and now they wanted me to be involved. They were talking about some twisted open relationship where we'd all just share. I didn't know whether to laugh or break something. Was this some kind of joke? A test? But the look on their faces told me it was real. They seriously expected me to be a willing participant in this messed up arrangement. I just stood there, my blood boiling. And then I noticed it. Nick's hand was still on her, resting on her leg like he owned her. That was the breaking point. Everything after that happened fast. Nick had just dropped the bomb about their so-called open relationship, and I was still trying to wrap my head around it. I couldn't believe Amanda, my wife of 7 years, was sitting there, looking me in the eyes, trying to act like this was a normal conversation. They wanted to turn our marriage into some kind of twisted triangle, and they thought I'd just go along with it. I was on the verge of losing it when something caught my eye. Amanda's phone lit up on the couch next to her. It was a text, and from where I stood, I could see it was from Nick. He was texting her right in front of me. As we sat there together, like it was some kind of twisted joke they were both in on, my heart was hammering in my chest, and it felt like the walls were closing in. My head was spinning, but one thing was crystal clear. I needed to get the hell out of there. I told them I was stepping outside to get some air, but what I really needed was space to make sense of what was happening. I grabbed my jacket and walked out into the backyard. The cold night air, slapping me in the face like a wake-up call. For a moment, I just stood there, staring up at the sky, trying to steady my breathing. All I could think about were the nights Amanda had supposedly been working late, all the times I'd trusted her without a second thought. Now it all felt like one big lie. The signs I had missed, the ones that seemed so obvious in hindsight, were flooding back, hitting me all at once. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, it did. I heard the soft sound of the sliding glass door behind me, the one leading from the living room to the backyard. I turned around, and there she was, Amanda. She'd followed me outside. Arms crossed, she stood there, looking like she had something important to say. But I didn't care. I wasn't ready to hear any excuse or explanation she had prepared. I was about to tell her to save it when she spoke first. "I'm sorry," she said. I laughed. Actually laughed, because sorry wasn't going to come close to fixing this. Sorry? For what exactly, Amanda? For cheating on me? For bringing that jerk into our house? For lying to me about all those late nights? Or are you just sorry you got caught? She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the pain and anger I was feeling. The betrayal. But then, like she had no shame left, she said something I'll never forget. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I stared at her in disbelief. "What does that even mean, Amanda? What did you think was going to happen? You've been screwing around behind my back, and now you're telling me you didn't mean for it to go this far?" My voice shook with barely contained rage. It felt like the air itself was buzzing with tension, but she just stood there, silent for a moment. And then she said it, the truth. "I've been seeing Nick for almost a year," she whispered, barely loud enough for me to hear. But it wasn't just about the sex. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Sex. She said it like it was nothing, like she was talking about something casual, something normal. But this wasn't normal, not for me. Not for the man who believed his wife was faithful. I didn't want to hear another word, but she kept talking like she had to get it all out. It started out as just physical, just sex. I thought I could handle it, that it wouldn't mean anything. But it did. It started to mean more. I took a step back, my hands trembling. Images of her and Nick flashed through my mind, together doing things that only she and I should have shared. The thought of him touching her, being intimate with her while I was completely in the dark, made me sick. "Did you bring him into our bed?" I asked, my voice cold and distant. She hesitated for just a second too long. "Tell me, Amanda, did you bring him into our house? Did you have sex with him in our bed?" She didn't answer right away, but I could read the guilt all over her face. "Not at first," she mumbled, but that was all I needed to hear. I stormed past her, heading back inside, straight toward the bedroom. I didn't even know what I was looking for, but I had to know. I had to see it with my own eyes. As soon as I walked into the bedroom, the bed we'd shared for 7 years, the bed where our kids were conceived, I felt like a stranger in my own home. I tore the sheets off the bed, threw the pillows to the floor, searching for what? I didn't even know. Proof, maybe? Something to confirm that they had defiled the one place that was supposed to be sacred. But then it hit me. This wasn't about the bed. It wasn't about the sex. It was about trust. The one thing I thought we had, the one thing that should have been untouchable, was shattered. She had betrayed me, and no matter what I found in that room, the damage was already done. Amanda followed me into the room, begging me to calm down. But I couldn't. There was no calming down after what I'd just heard. I spun around to face her, my chest burning with fury. "You think you could just say sorry and expect me to be okay with this? You really think I'm going to stick around while you sleep with someone else? Are you out of your mind?" She looked at me, wide-eyed, like she hadn't expected this reaction, like she genuinely thought I'd just go along with it, like I'd accept her betrayal and move on. "I thought you'd understand," Amanda said, her voice shaking. "Understand what, Amanda? That you've been cheating on me for a year? That you've been lying to me and to our kids while you sneak around with this guy?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off before she could. "It's exactly like that. You've been having sex with him, sneaking him into our home, and you really think I'm supposed to just be okay with that?" She didn't say anything after that, and that's when it hit me. There was nothing left to say. The guilt was written all over her face, and no amount of talking could fix what was already broken. The silence between us was suffocating. Amanda just stood there, pale, her lips trembling, but there were no tears. No real regret that I could see. It was like she had practiced for this moment, like she had already prepared for my reaction, maybe even hoping I'd eventually come around. But there was no chance of that happening. I took a deep breath, trying to keep the anger inside me from boiling over. My heart was pounding in my chest, and every part of me wanted to yell, to smash something, to destroy anything that reminded me of her and this whole disaster. I couldn't believe it had come to this. How had I missed all the signs? Amanda broke the silence, her voice soft and pleading. Gary, I know this is hard, but can't we just talk about it? Can't we try to work something out? That was it for me. She wanted to work something out, as if this was some kind of deal where I could negotiate my way through her betrayal. She didn't want to leave me. Oh no. She wanted both me and Nick. She wanted her perfect life, her husband, her kids, and her affair. I stepped closer to her, looking her dead in the eyes. Work something out? What exactly do you think we can work out, Amanda? How many nights you'll spend with him, and how many with me? Or maybe you figure we can all just get along and share you like some sort of community project? She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. This wasn't going to be easy, and I sure as hell wasn't going to make it easier for her. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, she whispered, her voice barely holding together. I love you, Gary. I do. But things between us, they haven't been the same for a while. I've felt disconnected. There it was, the classic excuse. She wasn't happy, she felt disconnected, and that was her reason for sleeping with someone else instead of talking to me about it. I let out a bitter laugh. Disconnected? And your solution was to sleep with another man? To sneak around behind my back for a whole year? You think that's going to help us reconnect? She reached out to touch me, but I stepped back. I didn't want her hands on me. Not after everything I'd just heard. It felt like her touch was contaminated, tainted by him, by Nick. I don't know what else to say, she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. I was confused. I didn't know how to tell you. I never wanted to hurt you like this. Well, congratulations, I snapped. You did it. You hurt me in ways you'll never understand. You've destroyed everything, and now you want me to sit here and listen to your excuses? That's when Amanda started to cry. Tears streamed down her face, and a small part of me hated seeing her like this. The woman I once loved more than anything in the world, now reduced to a stranger. But those tears didn't move me. They didn't make me want to comfort her. I just felt numb, except for the burning anger that was still raging inside me. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I heard the front door open. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed through the house like they belonged here. My heart sank because I knew who it was. Nick. That bastard had the audacity to come back into my house after everything. He walked into the bedroom like he was walking into his own place, like he had every right to be there. When our eyes met, something inside me snapped. The nerve of this guy just waltzing in like he wasn't the reason my life was falling apart. He wore that same smug expression he'd had earlier, like this whole situation was some kind of game and I was the clueless fool who didn't know the rules. Nick, Amanda said, her voice trembling. This isn't the time. I didn't let her finish. You think this is funny? I growled, stepping toward him, my fists clenched at my sides. You think you can just walk into my house and act like you belong here? Like you belong with my wife? Nick raised his hands, trying to stay calm, like he thought he was above all of this. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. I thought we were going to have a mature conversation about all this. A mature conversation? I barked. Are you out of your mind? You've been screwing my wife behind my back for a year, and you think this is something we can just talk about like adults? He had the nerve to look surprised, like he actually couldn't believe I was reacting this way. I get that you're angry, but Amanda and we care about you, man. We don't want to hurt you. We want you to be a part of this. Be a part of it? I couldn't believe the words coming out of Nick's mouth. He actually thought he could somehow include me in their twisted affair. Like this was some kind of arrangement we could all settle on. Like I'd be okay sharing my wife with him. Get the hell out of my house, I said, my voice low and full of warning. Before I do something we'll both regret. Nick opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't want to hear it. Rage was already surging through me, and before I knew it, I was charging at him, fists clenched and ready to land a punch. Amanda screamed and tried to pull me back, but it was too late. I grabbed Nick by the collar, slamming him against the bedroom wall. His smug expression disappeared, replaced by genuine fear, and that only fueled my anger. "I told you to get out," I growled through gritted teeth. "You walk into my house, sleep with my wife, and now you think you can make me part of this? You're out of your damn mind." Amanda's cries grew louder, begging me to stop, but I didn't care. I was seconds away from beating him senseless, and nothing was going to stop me. But then Nick, that slick bastard, said something that made me freeze. "Amanda told me you wouldn't take this well," he stammered, his voice shaky but still defiant. "But this isn't just about the sex, man. We were hoping you'd understand. Maybe even join us." Join them. I couldn't even wrap my mind around it. I was too stunned to speak. Was this what they had been planning all along? To bring me into their twisted relationship, like I was some kind of willing participant? They were offering me a chance to be part of their sick game. I released my grip on Nick, stepping back as nausea crept up on me. My heart was racing, and my head was spinning with disbelief. "Gary," Amanda whispered, stepping closer. "We can make this work. We can still be together, but we don't have to hide anymore. We don't have to lie. You and I can still have each other, but Nick, he can be part of this too." I turned to face her, and in that moment, the truth hit me like a freight train. This wasn't about love. It wasn't about fixing our marriage or trying to reconnect. This was about control. She wanted to have control over everything, me, Nick, our relationship, and she thought I'd just go along with it. "Get out," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Gary, please, just think about it. Get out," I shouted, louder than I ever thought possible. Amanda flinched, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then, she grabbed Nick's arm and pulled him toward the door. They left without saying another word, and as soon as they were gone, I collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel peaceful. Nothing felt right anymore. Everything had changed, and I knew there was no going back from this. After they left, the silence in the house felt heavy, like it was closing in on me. I was alone now, but it didn't feel like a relief. It felt like I'd just been abandoned in the aftermath of a wreck. My thoughts were a mess. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? One minute, I had a wife, a family, a life that seemed normal, and the next, I was standing in the middle of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I sat on the bed. Our bed. The same bed they had shared behind my back. The thought made my stomach turn. I couldn't stay in that room, couldn't stand being in the space that had been tainted by them. So I grabbed my keys and left. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get out. I needed to escape the memories that were poisoning everything around me. I ended up driving for hours, aimlessly wandering the streets, not sure where to go. I didn't want to go to my mom's house. I wasn't ready to explain what had just happened. It was all too raw, too fresh. So I just kept driving, letting the empty streets and dark sky blur together as I tried to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. All I could think about was Amanda, how she had lied to me, deceived me for months, all while pretending everything was fine. And that bastard Nick, his smug face was burned into my mind, acting like this was no big deal, like what they had done wasn't a complete betrayal. And the sex, that word wouldn't stop echoing in my head. I kept picturing them together, doing things that only she and I were supposed to do, sharing moments that were supposed to be ours. The thought of him touching her, of them having sex while I was at work, completely clueless, made my blood boil. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. How could she have done this? And worse, how could she have ever thought I'd join them? That I'd be okay with sharing my wife like it was some kind of sick joke? It was like I didn't even know who she was anymore. The woman I thought I married wouldn't have done this. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. All those nights Amanda was working late. All those excuses for why she was out, why she didn't want to be close to me, why she didn't want to be intimate. It all made sense now. She wasn't tired. She wasn't busy. She was with him, sleeping with him. I pulled the car over to the side of the road, the rage bubbling up inside me, threatening to spill over. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, cursing, yelling, trying to release the anger that had been building since the moment I found them together. I felt betrayed, humiliated, like I'd been played for a fool. Once I finally calmed down enough to think straight, I glanced at the clock. It was past midnight, and there I was sitting on the side of some random street, completely lost in my own misery. I couldn't stay there, and I sure as hell couldn't go back home. Not with the bed, the house, the memories of them. So I did the only thing that made sense at the time. I drove to a cheap motel on the edge of town and checked in. The room was small, dingy, and had a faint smell of cigarettes, but I didn't care. I just needed a place to crash, somewhere that wasn't filled with reminders of Amanda and him. I threw myself onto the stiff bed and stared up at the ceiling, my mind racing all over again. It wasn't just the cheating that was tearing me apart. It was the fact that Amanda had tried to justify it. She'd looked me right in the eyes and told me it wasn't just about sex, as if that would somehow make it better. She had feelings for Nick, and that made it worse. In a way, it was even more painful. The fact that she had emotionally checked out of our marriage and made space for someone else in her heart, all while pretending everything was fine with me. I couldn't stop imagining them together. How long had it been going on? A year? An entire year of lies, while she was sneaking off to be with him. I wondered if they had met up during her lunch breaks, or in hotel rooms, or maybe even at his office. I wondered if she'd brought him into our house more than once. How many times had he been in our bed, touching her, while I was clueless? And what did that mean for us? For our sex life? All those times we were together? Was she thinking of him? Was I just a stand-in when Nick wasn't available? The thought made me sick. I could still hear her voice in my head, telling me it wasn't just about the sex, but it was about that, wasn't it? The sneaking around, the physical betrayal. She had given him what was supposed to be mine, and now she wanted to keep us both like we were toys she could play with. I sat up, rubbing my face with my hands, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. I wasn't ready to talk to her, to face her again, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't stay in a marriage where I was the second option, the backup plan while she played house with someone else. No, this couldn't be fixed. There was no fixing this. I knew I had to confront her again, but this time, it would be on my terms. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into some twisted arrangement where she got the best of both worlds. She had made her choice the moment she brought Nick into our lives. Now, she was going to live with the consequences. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind wouldn't stop replaying everything. Her lies, her excuses, the image of them together. By the time the sun began to rise, I had made my decision. I was done with Amanda. Done with the lies, the games, the cheating. She could have her fun with Nick, but she wasn't going to have me anymore. I'd make sure of that. I checked out of the motel early and headed back to the house, knowing I had to face her again. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say, but I knew one thing. This was the beginning of the end. I pulled into the driveway just as the sun was coming up, and I sat there for a minute, staring at the house. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt foreign, like I was an outsider looking in on a place I no longer belonged. This was the house where we built our life, where we raised our kids, and now it was just a shell filled with broken promises. I had spent the night in a dingy motel, and Amanda? I didn't even know where she was, or worse, who she was with. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My mind was made up. I wasn't going to let Amanda drag me any deeper into this nightmare. I had to confront her, set things straight, and make it clear that I wasn't playing her game anymore. As I walked up to the front door, the key in my hand felt heavier than ever before. When I stepped inside, the house was eerily quiet. No sounds from the kids' toys, no coffee brewing in the kitchen, nothing. It felt like I had walked into a stranger's home, and I wasn't about to let any sentimental attachment hold power over me. The bedroom door was shut, and for a split second, my heart dropped. Was Nick still here? Had they spent the night together? The thought of walking in on them again made my blood boil. But I forced myself to push through the anger. I had to know. I threw the door open, bracing myself for whatever was waiting on the other side. But it was just Amanda, alone. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes were red and swollen from crying. For a second, guilt flickered in my chest, seeing her so broken. But then the memory of what she had done came rushing back, and I hardened myself against any pity I might have felt. She stood up quickly, like she was about to explain everything again, but I wasn't there for her excuses. Gary, I don't. I cut her off, my voice cold. I don't want to hear any more lies. No more excuses. I'm done, Amanda. Her eyes widened in shock, and she stepped closer, her hands out in front of her, as if she could stop me from walking away. Please just listen to me. I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you. But we can fix this. We can still make this work. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Make this work? How? You think I'm going to stick around while you keep screwing him? You think I'm going to be the idiot who lets his wife cheat and does nothing about it? It wasn't just about the sex, she shouted, her voice cracking. It was more than that. I was lonely. I felt like we were drifting apart. I made a mistake. But I still love you, Gary. I do. That's bullshit, Amanda, and you know it. I snapped. You don't get to cheat for a year and then call it a mistake. You knew exactly what you were doing. Every single time. You chose him. You chose to lie. And now you want to keep both of us in your little fantasy? No. I'm done with this. I'm done with you. She stood there, speechless for a moment, her lips trembling. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, I didn't want to lose you. I didn't know how to stop once it started. I felt a surge of anger rise up again. Lose me? You lost me the second you let him touch you, Amanda. The second you had sex with him. The second you brought him into our home. Into our bed. She winced at that, but I wasn't about to let her off easy. I had been the loyal husband, the trusting fool. And now it was my turn to lay everything out. Do you even realize what you've done? I asked, my voice low and cold. You didn't just hurt me. You shattered everything. Every memory, every moment we shared. It's all tainted now. And you think we can fix this? Her tears started again, but this time I didn't care. She had done this. She had brought this disaster into our lives, and now she had to live with the consequences. I don't want a divorce, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't want to lose you. I shook my head, stepping back. Well, you should have thought about that before you started screwing him. You don't get to cheat and then ask me to stay. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the panic. She knew, finally, that she had pushed me too far. There was no going back now. Please, Gary, she begged, stepping toward me again. We can go to therapy. We can work through this. I'll end it with Nick, I swear. I'll do whatever it takes. But I was already done. I didn't want her promises, her tears, or her apologies. They meant nothing now. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And I wasn't going to be the guy who stayed with the woman who kept breaking his heart. Therapy won't fix this, Amanda, I said quietly. Nothing will. You made your choice. I watched as the realization dawned on her face. She finally knew I wasn't going to stay. She knew I was serious. Her hands dropped to her sides, and for the first time, she didn't have anything to say. I turned to leave, but then something stopped me. One last question burned in my mind, and I couldn't walk away without knowing. How many times? I asked, my voice tight. She looked at me, confused. What? How many times did you sleep with him? In our bed. Her face paled, and she hesitated before answering. Gary, just tell me, I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. How many times? She swallowed hard, her eyes dropping to the floor. 5, maybe 6. I don't remember. That was it. The final nail in the coffin. I felt like I was going to be sick. The image of them together in our bed, my bed, was burned into my mind. It was too much. I turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I couldn't stay in that house for another second. It felt poison, just like our marriage. I needed to get out, to escape the suffocating weight of what had happened. As I walked out the front door, I could hear Amanda calling after me, but I didn't turn around. I didn't even glance back. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove off, leaving everything behind. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing. I wasn't coming back. Not to that house. Not to her. She had destroyed everything, and now I needed to start figuring out how to pick up the pieces. I drove aimlessly for hours, the numbness settling in like a cold weight in my chest. The streets were filling with people heading to work, going about their normal lives, while mine had just been shattered. I couldn't go back to that house. I didn't even know if I could ever set foot in it again. Everything inside felt contaminated by lies, by betrayal, by him. Eventually, I ended up at a diner on the edge of town. One of those old places that looks like it hasn't changed in 50 years. But the coffee's strong, and no one asks questions. That was exactly what I needed. A quiet spot where I could sit and figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. I took a seat in the corner, far from the windows, and ordered a black coffee. The waitress didn't even look at me when she set it down, and I was grateful for that. I wasn't in the mood for small talk or sympathy. As I sat there, staring into the cup, my mind wandered back to Amanda's words. It wasn't just about the sex. The way she had said it, like that somehow made everything better. Like the fact that she had feelings for Nick made the betrayal less disgusting. But it didn't. It made it worse. The physical betrayal I could almost understand. People make mistakes, have moments of weakness. But this wasn't just a bad decision. She had chosen him again and again. Let him into our lives, our bed, our marriage. She had opened a door I didn't even know existed. And now she was asking me to walk through it with them. What kind of person does that? I took a sip of the coffee, bitter and hot, and leaned back in the booth. The realization was hitting me hard now. I wasn't going to save this marriage. And more importantly, I didn't want to. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built my life with, was gone. Or maybe she had never really been there, and I'd been living in a fantasy this whole time. Either way, it didn't matter now. I was done pretending. I was going to leave her. The thought was terrifying, but also strangely freeing. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to be part of whatever twisted arrangement she and Nick had cooked up. I took another sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, and started making a plan. I needed to see a lawyer. I needed to figure out the house, the kids, everything. I had to make sure I wasn't screwed over any more than I already had been. Then, I'd file for divorce. But the kids, that was the hardest part. What was I supposed to do about them? How do you walk away from your wife without destroying your family in the process? I didn't have an answer for that yet. But I knew one thing. I couldn't stay for them. Not like this. Staying would only make things worse for everyone. I pulled out my phone, staring at the screen for a long time before finally finding the contact I needed. It was a lawyer I knew through a friend. His name was Jeff, and he had a reputation for being ruthless when it came to divorce cases. My hand shook slightly as I hit dial, my heart pounding as I waited for him to answer. Jeff Carlson came his clipped professional voice. "Jeff, it's Gary," I said, my voice sounding weaker than I expected. "I need to talk to you. It's about Amanda." There was a brief pause before he replied. "I'm sorry to hear that. Let's set up a meeting. Can you come by my office later today?" I agreed, and we scheduled the meeting for that afternoon. As I hung up the phone, a strange sense of relief washed over me. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I was taking control. I was doing something to get out of this mess. I paid for my coffee and left the diner, my mind clearer than it had been in days. There was still a long road ahead, but at least now I had a direction. By the time I got to Jeff's office later that day, I had managed to push most of the anger down, but the hurt still gnawed at me. Jeff was exactly how I remembered him. Sharp suit, sharp mind, the kind of guy who doesn't miss a thing. I walked in, sat down across from him, and laid everything out. The affair, the betrayal, every painful detail. He listened carefully, nodding every now and then, but never interrupted. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair, hands folded in front of him. "You've got 2 kids, right?" "Yeah, 5 and 3, I replied, my voice heavy with emotion. He sighed, shaking his head. "This isn't going to be easy, Gary. Courts usually favor the mother in custody cases unless you can prove she's unfit. The fact that she's having an affair won't necessarily affect custody unless you can show it's impacting the kids." I nodded, already knowing this wasn't going to be a clean break. "I don't want to take the kids from her," I said, and I meant it. I don't know what to do. I can't stay with her after everything, but I don't want to make this harder for them." Jeff gave me a sympathetic look, though I could tell he'd had this conversation many times before. "We can file for divorce and ask for joint custody. It won't be easy, but if you handle things right, you'll still get to see them as much as possible. As for the house, that's going to be up for negotiation, but you should think about moving out for now." "Move out?" I asked, my stomach twisting at the idea of leaving the only place I called home for years. And go where? Find a temporary place, he suggested. If things get messy, you don't want to be living under the same roof. Trust me, it'll make everything worse. I rubbed my face, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. But I knew he was right. I couldn't stay there, not after everything that had happened. I needed space, and I needed to start thinking about what my life would look like without her in it. Okay, I said finally. Let's do it. Jeff nodded and began explaining the next steps, filing paperwork, gathering financial records, figuring out custody schedules. It all felt overwhelming, but I did my best to stay focused. I had to keep moving forward. There was no other option. By the time I left Jeff's office, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I sat in my car for a few minutes, letting everything sink in. I was really doing this. I was really leaving Amanda and breaking apart everything we had built. But there was no turning back now. I had made my decision, and I was going to see it through. When I pulled up to the house, the lights were on inside, and I could see Amanda through the front window, sitting on the couch with her head in her hands. Strangely, I didn't feel anything. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. I had spent the last few days mourning a marriage that had died long before I realized it. I stepped inside, and Amanda looked up, her eyes puffy and red from crying. "Gary, we need to talk," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I closed the door behind me and took a deep breath. "I've already talked to a lawyer, Amanda. I'm filing for divorce." She flinched at the word, and for a moment, I thought she might break down again. But she didn't. She just sat there, staring at me, like she couldn't believe it had come to this. "I'm moving out," I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll find a place nearby, and we'll work out a custody schedule for the kids. But this, whatever this is, it's over." She didn't say anything for a long time. She just sat there, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Are you sure?" she asked finally, her voice barely audible. "Yeah," I said, my chest tightening. "I'm sure." There was nothing left to say. The woman I had loved, the woman I thought I would spend the rest of my life with, was gone. Maybe she had been gone for a while, and I just hadn't noticed. But now it was time to move on. Time to let go of the anger, the hurt, and the betrayal, and start rebuilding my life. I left her sitting there on the couch, walked into the bedroom one last time, and packed a bag with whatever I could fit. As I walked out of the house, the weight on my chest felt just a little lighter. I didn't know where I was going yet, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. Thank you for joining us for this touching journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. We hope it resonated with you, even brought a little inspiration. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reactions in the comments. Feel free to share your own experiences or let us know what kinds of stories you'd like to see next. Thanks again for your support. Until then, take care and stay tuned for more great content.